So I'd like to welcome everyone to NYU DC tonight for tonight's program. New year, new members, the newest NYU alumni in the 119th Congress. So tonight we're fortunate to hear from 4 recently elected members of Congress that are also NYU alumni. We have Congresswoman Laura Gillen of New York, Congressman Troy Downing of Montana, Congressman Ryan Mackenzie of Pennsylvania, and we're going to have Congressman George Latimer from New York join us shortly. NYU, we now have 10 alumni in Congress. It's the most we've ever had in NYU's long history, so it's exciting times. Moderating the discussion is Patrick J. Egan, Professor of Politics and Public Policy in the NYU Wilf Family Department of Politics and the Associate Professor of Public Service at NYU Wagner. So we're going to hear from each of the members about their NYU experiences, their unique journeys to the U.S. House of Representatives. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the NYU Bradamus Center, Tom McIntyre, Polly Turzan, and Michael Denisha for all their work to put this event together tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat Egan. Thank you, Pat, and thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Great. Well, as Steve said, my name is Patrick Egan. I teach in the politics department at NYU in New York, although I've spent a lot of time here teaching our students as well. And it's really great to be here. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you today to talk about the experiences of our newest NYU alumni representatives in Congress. So we're going to get started with Congressman Downing, Congresswoman Gillen, and Congressman Mackenzie. Once Congressman Latimer arrives, we will just fold him in to the conversation. And just to frame the conversation, if you were expecting a screeching debate of the kind that seems to pour endlessly from your cable TV news screens, you have come to the wrong place. There's already plenty of that to go around. And really today, we're going to take the opportunity to be with NYU alums to get an insider's perspective on things like pursuing a career in public service, running for office, and what the first few months have been like for our alumni in the halls of Congress. We'll end our conversation with a few questions about important policy challenges that are facing our nation. And after the conversation takes place on stage, we'll take a selection of questions posed by our audience. To submit a question, have we distributed index cards? Is that good? Okay. Write it on an index card that has been provided to you and signal to one of our staffers. We're going to collect it and we'll choose a selection of those questions to ask our members. So to begin, and maybe I'll just start from my immediate left to further out. Tell us a bit about your path to Congress, Congresswoman Gillen. As you know, we have a lot of students here in the audience who are spending a semester here in DC. Have you always been interested in politics? Did you know that this is what you wanted to do when you were in college, when you were in law school? Give us a little bit of background, and I'm going to ask the same question to the two of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you all for being here. Delighted to be with all of you tonight. So my path to Congress was very circuitous. I did have always an interest in politics. I went to Georgetown here in DC. I was a government major. I interned on the Hill for Senator Bro. And so, you know, was always interested, but after I graduated, I wanted to do other things. I did a whole bunch of different things. I went to Stella Adler. I was an actor for a little while. Then I went to Asia and I worked for Mother Teresa in Calcutta. I worked in a dive school in Thailand. I had a lot of fun in my 20s. And then I came back and my parents are very happy because I went to law school at NYU. I actually started at Georgetown because at first I wanted to go to law school at night. Then I decided that I was going to go full time. And my boyfriend, who's in the front row, is now my husband, was living in New York. And he said, well, if you're going to go to full time, why don't you go to school in New York? So I applied to NYU. I got in and worked in law, had some kids at a big Manhattan law firm. Well, I didn't have the kids there. I was working at a big Manhattan law firm, moved to the suburbs, had some more kids, worked in a law firm there, and didn't think I really wanted to get into politics because it seemed too mean-spirited and there was too much mudslinging, and I didn't really know if I wanted to subject myself and my family to that. But then, you know, when I was sitting in my law firm one day, there was something going on in local politics. I won't go into it because it would take too long, but there was so much corruption in our local government. And I paid a lot of attention to national and international politics, but not really to local politics, which I think a lot of people do. But local politics is where there's so much graft that can go on. And there was something that happened locally that just like fired up the activist in me. And I said, my gosh, well, if I want to fix things, I can't just complain. I have to do something. So I started getting involved locally in politics, on the sidelines, supporting other candidates. And then eventually I decided to take a stab at a local office. It was for the county clerk. And I thought that's a good foray into politics because no one knows who the county clerk is. Nobody knows what a county clerk does. And like there was never going to be any mudslinging in this race. So I tried it. I thought I was pretty good at it. I did not win, but I was like, okay, I liked it. And I said, I'll just keep going. And so then a couple years later, I ran for a seat. And it was to be the supervisor of the town of Hempstead, which on Long Island it's the largest township in America. I had 774,000 residents. And I was the first Democrat in 112 years to be elected to that seat. And it was because I ran in a place where I grew up. I had lots of friends on both sides of the aisle. I had deep roots there. And I was fighting against a culture of corruption. And that's how I got there. And then from there, I ultimately ran for Congress.
Great story, thank you. And I know all four of our guests today have experience in state and or local politics, so that is an important part of the path. And I'm happy to hear more about that from Congressman Downing.
Well, thank you, and thanks for sharing that story. You talk about the circuitous nature. You know, I think we're probably kindred spirits there. I started out my professional career. I was a research scientist at the Quran Institute of Mathematical Sciences, and one of the founding researchers of the Media Research Lab. And that started out as a computer-aided manufacturing research lab, and then we turned it into really computer graphics research. We did procedural texturing, procedural animation, did some incredible things there. And I taught briefly in the information technology department, and came from a poor family. I was in a single parent family, and I made it. I had a research position, I had a teaching position at the best university in the country. And so what did I do? I quit. And my mom's like, "You did what?" I quit. And why? I said, "Well, I want to do this startup company." And she's like, "What's a startup company?" Anyway, so I left there and founded a startup company that did basically groupware, personal information management. And then shortly after that, successfully did a pooling of interest merger with a nascent Yahoo Incorporated. And it changed my life. So coming from a poor family and then having a mom, like seeing that's incredible. And I tried to help other people do the same thing. So did a lot of angel financing of nascent startup companies. Did about 150 of them, some individually and some with a group I was involved with. And we had some very famous failures and some very famous successes. My favorite failure was Napster. We lost all of our money when Metallica came after us and shut us down. But, we had some successes. We did Ask Jeeves, we did Priceline, we did, the 800-pound gorillas. We seed funded Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and obviously that went on to become a verb. And so here's another NYU connection there.
Yeah.
Is before I had ever heard about them, Professor Perlin, who was the director of the Media Research Lab at Courant, he reached out and he says, "You got to see what these guys are doing in search algorithms. It's really great." And I'm going, so they had this way of ranking results rather than just word searches for having, better results. And so, I was part of the group that seed funded that.
Wow.
And I had left Yahoo by then. And so we tried to get Yahoo to buy them. They were the search engine for Yahoo before Yahoo had its own search engine, and try to get them to buy. And we had a $1 billion delta. Yahoo had just bought this company called GeoCities for $6.7 billion. We wanted $2 billion for Google.
Wow.
And Terry Semel, the CEO at the time, couldn't get past $1 billion. So there's a $1 billion delta there. And we thought it was fair, 6.7 for GeoCities, it seemed fair, but he killed the deal and Google went on to become a verb, and Yahoo got dismantled by Verizon. So, interesting part there. So, fast forward a little bit, getting into how I ended up in Congress. Something that really changed my life was September 11th. When September 11th happened, I was one of the last people on the planet to hear about it. I was moose hunting in Alaska. So just me and Jerry, who's a good friend of mine, got dropped off by a bush pilot in the middle of nowhere. Our only communications, we had an aviation radio, and shot a moose up there. Sorry if that's offensive to anybody. I'm from Montana. And it took us about 3.5 days to hike it back. And as we're hiking this moose back, there weren't any planes flying, no contrails, doing the polar route to Asia, no bush pilots, no fish and game pilots, nothing. And it struck me after, because this was a normal occurrence every day, and I couldn't imagine what could make planes stop flying. I'm thinking nuclear holocaust. And so I was talking to Jerry. I said, if they don't come pick us up on the 16th, we got to hike out of here, which it would have taken us a year to hike to Anchorage. It was 350 miles of mountains and glaciers and rivers and whatever. And so finally, it's getting to that day. We pack up camp. We got a bunch of meat. We got a couple of rifles, some tents, some fishing bowls. We're getting ready to head south. And I looked Jerry square in the eye and I said, don't get any ideas. We're not going to repopulate the earth. Our first sign of civilization is we hear the plane off in the distance, comes, lands on the lake. It's like the same plane from Fantasy Island. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Fantasy Island.
Yeah, sure.
So comes in, tails, taxis into shore, shuts down the engine, sticks his head out the window, says, guess what? I'm like, what? They blew up the World Trade Center. Who? And he used a derogatory term I'm not going to repeat, but hit me in the chest. I'm going, both of them? Yeah, I took them both down. I didn't see it on TV, so I'm picturing these things falling down and taking out lower Manhattan. And I'm hit with this sadness, this sense of anger of being attacked, the sense of violation of being attacked on our own soil. And then I had something else kind of well up inside of me. I was the unplanned pregnancy of an unwed teenage mom. My mom was living with her mom when I was born, who died about a month later, and I think of the struggles that she had. And look at me now. I'm moose hunting in Alaska. I'm a pilot. I own an airplane that's parked a couple 100 miles away. And I'm thinking, well, this country has been really good to me. What have I ever done to deserve it? And I didn't have a good answer. I got stuck in Alaska because the borders were closed. I couldn't fly over Canada, so I had a little bit of time to think about it. And I'm on the Canadian border in Ketchikan, and it's a new world. There's police tape everywhere. There's Humvees on the ramp. There's snipers on the roof, and I'm thinking, what am I coming back into? And they opened the borders. I flew home, and the next day I walked into a recruiter's office, and I said, hey, I've got a pilot's license. Used to teach at NYU. What can you do with me? The recruiter looks me in the eye and says, how old are you? I said, 34. He goes, good. 35 is the cutoff. So that was the start of my military career. So went into a combat search and rescue squadron, did a couple of tours to Afghanistan. I needed to feel like I deserved everything that this country had meant to me. And so I ended up, did a couple of tours to Afghanistan. Kind of a fun part, I just turned 35 when I went to boot camp. So I was the oldest man in boot camp, and they told me that every day. I was grandpa, but I still kicked their butts. And went off to SEER school, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. They beat me up, locked me in a box, actually broke a couple of my teeth. That's the one place they can touch you, where they teach you how to survive being a prisoner of war. Went to mission qual, and after you get your wings out of mission qual, your squadron gives you your call sign. And it's usually a mistake. Like, we had one guy, he blew up a bag of sea dye in the back of the helicopter, so his call sign was sea dye, and I was really hoping for Maverick. I would have settled for Goose, but no, they gave me Yahoo, so I'm in Afghanistan with Yahoo on my flight suit. But fast forwarding, there's just been that was my most embarrassed to say that was my first thought of public service. And, did that for about 8 years, and then started seeing other problems, other things that I thought I had something that I could help with. So during my time in the military, part of that was guard, part of it was active duty. And so I built an investment banking group. We did medical device companies, commercial real estate, some other things, and also built an insurance company, and saw how hard it was building businesses in highly regulated industries, you know, in the pitfalls that I had. And so fast forward a little bit more, I had an opportunity to run for office in the state of Montana. So I was, the last 4 years, I was the one of the 5 constitutional officers in Montana. My title was the state auditor, but that was the commissioner of securities and insurance. And I was the first commissioner of insurance and securities in the history of Montana that actually had an insurance and securities background. So it was an incredible opportunity to, you know, solve problems there and make it easy for business to do business. And so one of the things that really struck me in that role is a lot of the things that I had to deal with as a state regulator came from DC. And they had these blanket approaches that didn't work in rural states. Montana's a very rural state. People don't realize that you go on the High Line, which is our Canadian border, it's the same distance as here to Chicago. You know, it's a big state, you know, and a lot of the things that came from DC just didn't work. You know, network adequacy for qualified health plans don't work when you've got counties that only have 500 people in them because there's only so many providers, doctors, you know, pediatricians, cardiologists, you know, all this checklist of folks you have to have. And I got frustrated with that. And so I had an opportunity to run for Congress, and you know, I was successful doing that. And so I tell folks I'm on the financial services, which is germane to my background. It's capital formation. You know, I'm on the digital assets subcommittee, so dealing with blockchain, crypto, artificial intelligence, which is incredibly exciting, incredibly scary at the same time. I'm on the task force on monetary policy. I worked really hard on getting on those because I wanted to hit the ground running and be able to contribute on day one. And actually, I am in the middle of marking up a bill right now that we expect to vote on tonight at midnight, and they let me get out. So if he starts waving at me, that means I need to run and get back to the, you know, to the Capitol. And yeah, exactly. But you know, I just want to, you know, my journey has really been about, you know, I love this country. You know, I talk about, you know, my kind of meager beginnings, and I think about that girl who got pregnant in high school, who was living on her own and raised me. And 3.5 months ago, a girl came to DC and saw her son get sworn into Congress. I mean, God bless America. But that's how I got here.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate that. And Congressman Mackenzie, your story.
Well, it's going to be much less interesting. I took a much more direct route to Congress, and it started, you know, being raised in a family where politics and government were things that we talked about around the dinner table. And so that was something that was and still is part of the fabric of our family. And so grew up with that interest, but nobody had ever gone into politics or government in a full-time capacity. So I never really considered it a job or a career or anything like that. But for me, when I was at NYU, I was at Stern. I got a degree in finance and international business. I see another Stern alum here. That's great. And so I was receiving a great education there, and I was going to go the traditional finance route. It turned out, even though I was very good at it, it wasn't a passion of mine. And so I was kind of searching the summer before my senior year of college, and my hometown congressman, the connection for me that got me into a government position was he was on, back then I think it was called the Banking and Securities Committee or something like that, before it became Financial Services. And so I did an internship with him, but on the political side. He was running for US Senate at the time. It was Pat Toomey. He ultimately did become a US Senator. And so I worked on his campaign, and I just absolutely fell in love with the political side of things. Being out, interacting with people in the local community, doing outreach and events, doing, you know, policy discussions and roundtables, and just the changing nature of the work was what really attracted me to that position. And so I graduated a semester early from NYU then. And so it was, you know, December/January, and I went back to him and was looking for advice about, you know, careers and jobs. And he said, well, why don't you just come work for me for a couple of months? You're kind of off schedule for traditional recruiting in the finance industry. So why don't you come work for me? And so I did that full time 3 months later, he ended up losing that primary, and we were challenging an entrenched incumbent. So I kind of thought my career in politics was over, but had clearly done a good job on that campaign, and people referred me to another campaign. And so in some ways, it's not dissimilar from a lot of other careers. Just one thing led to the next, met people on that campaign that led to the next job and the next, and then ultimately came down here to Washington, D.C., where I worked at the U.S. Department of Labor for a cabinet member, did that, and thought I was going to get out of government, and went back to Harvard Business School to get my MBA. And I felt like NYU had trained me so well in business, but those skills were totally transferable to politics or government or whatever you wanted to do. And so I felt like advancing my business education was going to do that same thing for me. And so I had done a couple of internships while I was at HBS in business development in New York City at NBC Universal, which became Comcast, and then also Forbes on the digital side. And so was going to go that route, but then Senator Toomey, called and invited me to come back to run his statewide operation for the RNC that year. And so I was finishing up at HBS, and I thought, all right, I don't know if I had really wanted to go back to government or not, but it was kind of a big management responsibility. At that point in my career, I didn't have management experience. So I felt like it was a good opportunity to kind of get that on my resume. And ultimately, we were successful. He got elected that year. We also elected a governor in Pennsylvania and a bunch of other House members. And the governor who we had helped elect, who I didn't know before then, he actually offered me the position to be his director of labor policy. And so ended up going to do that, and was very excited about the work we were doing. And as a staff member, the transferable skills come to play. I ended up writing a bond refinancing deal for about $3 billion of unemployment compensation debt that had been issued to the federal government and to pay off debt that they had in their unemployment comp system from the recession. But I realized we could do refinance in the private market, considerably cut that rate down, save tens of millions of dollars for the state of Pennsylvania. And we ended up doing that, and it became law. And I wrote that as a staff member at the Labor Department. But then a couple months later, I was only at the department for 9 months, and they were taking up that legislation at the time. And the majority leader in the state house, there was a vacancy because a member had left to become a judge. And he said, "Get me that staff member on the phone. I think that guy lives in that district. We want him to run for office." And I was like, all right, well, I have the support of the majority leader. That kind of changes things for somebody who is 29 and you're sitting there going, how do I raise money? How do I run a campaign? Like, I kind of know the nuts and bolts of being a staff member, but it was a daunting task. But when you have somebody who is willing to support you, I asked my family, my local political contacts, they were all behind me. And so ended up winning that race in a special election, which we just went through a couple special elections. Special elections become the focus of the entire country. And so we were kind of a test case. It was 2012. We were a test case for a lot of national messaging that was going on, drew a lot of interest, a lot of attention, but we ended up winning that race. And then I served 12 years in the state legislature and became Republican chair of the Labor and Industry Committee, and passed things like expanding maternal health care, which is one of my passions. So we created the Maternal Mortality Review Committee in Pennsylvania to improve maternal health and maternal health outcomes. And then the other thing that I'm passionate about, totally different topic, but is cracking down on illegal labor. And so as chair of the Republican Labor and Industry Committee, in Pennsylvania, stakeholders, both union and non-union, came together and they said, we are getting crushed by illegal labor in the construction industry. They are taking away our jobs. They're underbidding legitimate businesses that are doing work. They aren't paying taxes into the system. And so we actually passed mandatory E-Verify for the construction industry. And those that don't use it, those businesses can be fined and ultimately disbarred. So that kind of work, we did that in a bipartisan fashion on both of those issues. But those things have now carried over to the federal level. And so I'm on energy or education in the workforce, and I'm subcommittee chair for workforce protections. And then, so that continues a lot of that same work that I just talked about. I have a tax package to help working families because far too many families are making conscious decisions, individual, rational, economic decisions saying, I can't make enough but pay for childcare, so I'm exiting the labor market. And so have a whole tax package for working families, and then have expanded E-Verify legislation that I'm working on as well. But the other two committees that I'm on, in addition to education and the workforce, are Homeland Security and Foreign Affairs. They match up with what we talked about on the campaign trail. And those issues are economic, illegal immigration, and in our community in Pennsylvania, it's a very diverse ethnic community. So we have Muslim populations, Jewish populations, Eastern European communities, all who have obviously conflicts going on at home. And so I ran, and I believe that we need to stop these forever wars that are going on around the globe. So getting on Foreign Affairs is a place where I can advocate for that as well. So very excited about that. And it's an exciting time to be in the legislature now in Congress. And I defeated an incumbent in a race that cost $40 million.
Wow, I didn't know it got that expensive. Yeah. Wow.
But ultimately, it's because people were looking for change in so many different areas. And, I think our message resonated, and being a ninth generation resident of the community, while it's not in any way a requirement, obviously, to run for Congress in the home area you have. But I think the Congresswoman shared that makes a big difference when you're representing your home community. You have a more intimate knowledge base, and also those contacts and connections of growing up there are very helpful politically. So couldn't be more grateful to be here, but I always say, the education I learned both at NYU and Harvard has set me apart, even though I never worked in those fields as a profession. They have given me great knowledge and experience to do things in a unique way and bring a different perspective to government.
Terrific. Thank you very much. So one thing I just want to note for our students is lots of different paths to elected office, to public service. It doesn't sound like any of you knew that you wanted to be an elected official when you were certainly in college and graduate school. And so I think that's an important thing to note, because often I think a lot of young people can think that they need to have everything figured out. I hear that from a lot of my students, and that's absolutely not the case. And in some sense, you're all better public servants for the fact that you've had all these other experiences. So I think that's worth noting. So I just want to make it clear, this is the first term in Congress for all of our guests tonight. They're brand new elected to Congress. And I think we've hit almost exactly 3 months of your service this week or something like that. Tomorrow, there we go. So tell us, what's been the most surprising thing about being in Congress? I mean, all of you had some sense of what you're getting into. A number of you have worked in Congress one way or the other. What's the thing that's taking you by surprise? Anyone? Yeah, go, feel free.
Well, one of the things, I don't know if this is really a surprise, it's just a different expectation. With my background, I'm a constantly curious person. I'm the kind of person that wants to research. I want to read. I want to follow up. You always say, well, who reads these bills? And you go into committee, and there's some materials on the committee on, there's materials that were submitted by the speakers, and you get this little stack of paper, and you kind of, well, I'm going to go back and read this, and then you've got your next committee meeting, so you get another little stack, and then you get scheduled. My whole day is leaving something early to get to something else late.
Right.
And so you get this little stack by the end of the day, and you're done with whatever you're doing at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and you're beat. You go home. I start my days at 5:30 in the morning. I'm on the congressional baseball team, so that was a choice. But so go do that in the morning, and then get in, and then you've got this stack that's getting bigger and bigger on your desk. And I try to kind of highlight a couple, and then you just can't keep up with it. And so I think one of the things, the way that I solve that problem is you just have to have a really good team, and you have to make sure that they understand what's important to you and that they're thoughtful about, how they divide and conquer the stuff that you have to deal with. I mean, ultimately, it's your name on the door there and you're making these decisions. But probably the most interesting thing for me is I just don't have time to read anymore. I don't have time to dig into things as I've always done in my life. So that's a little bit of an adjustment.
Yeah, it speaks to the importance of good legislative staff, which of course is an entry-level position for a lot of folks who might be here studying at NYU DC and elsewhere. Other surprises?
So it's interesting, Troy, you get up at 5:30 to play baseball. I get up at 5:30, not by choice. My 1-year-old wakes me up at 5:30
Oh boy,
every
wow,
morning.
okay.
And
Yeah.
so that's when I start the day, and I take the morning shift. Because one thing you do find out about this job is it is, and it really can be if you don't control it, an all-consuming job.
Yeah.
I mean, it really takes over your life 24/7. And it's to the point where our staff schedule personal time and schedule time where I can run home. I'm grateful my family, my wife is able to work remotely. We have this little guy, a 1-year-old and a rescue dog. And so we pull back and forth between Pennsylvania and here. And so it is important to have a good team. But I would say this, the other thing that's surprising is you see on TV that things look chaotic and messy, and it turns out they're even worse than you thought. You see it in federal budgeting. Our state budget in Pennsylvania, it has a constitutionally required balanced amendment deadline on June 30th. So yes, there's a lot of pressure to get it done every single year. Here in Congress, and it's roughly $40 billion. Here in Congress, there are 12 different pieces to the budget. They're all moving at different times of year. They get extended for a month or 7 months or whatever. And then when something comes up like USAID on the Foreign Affairs Committee, where I serve, roughly a $40 billion program, in Pennsylvania, we would give that state budget of $40 billion months of consideration. Here in Congress, you have a 2-hour hearing on USAID, and people are like, okay, we got enough information. We're ready to move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
And, and unfortunately, that magnitude and that scope, people tried to put it in perspective on the committee. They said, well, it's only 0.7% of the federal budget or something like that. And they testified to that, and they said it in the hearing. And I was like, it's still $40 billion, guys. Like, I think we should be giving some more consideration to this. So I'm sure we will. We'll go back to it, but the magnitude, the scope, the chaotic process is what surprised me coming from state government, where I thought it was, a complicated, messy situation. It's got nothing on.
All right, we'll note that. Congresswoman.
I think I echo some of the surprise that the congressman talked about. Just the crazy pace of your day when you're in Congress. It operates very different than local government. In my local government, we had an agenda. We knew what we were going to talk about. We sat down. We debated it. We could argue back and forth from the dais about why things were good or why things were bad. And the public could come and comment. And so there was really like a lot of participation when we were passing legislation. Obviously, there's so much more legislation that we're passing each week in Congress, but it's as the congressman described, like you have these bills that are put on your desk. This one's suspension, this one's not. This one's going to the rule. You have to go, but now you have to go to your committee. You go, you gavel in, you're there, you say hello to everybody, then out the door you go, because there are 3 meetings in your office. Then you got to run back to committee. Then you ask your questions of the witnesses, and you didn't hear half of their testimony, but you had the opportunity to read it the night before, but you missed it. So someone might have asked the same question that you have, but you weren't there. And then you run back to your office to do more meetings, and you run to the floor to do votes. And then sometimes you'll see people go, wait, because they're busy chatting, and they didn't even realize that they were calling the next vote. it's really, really a crazy, chaotic place. So that was very, very surprising to me as someone who, you know, in local government, I would go through my agenda. I knew every single thing that was going to be voted on. I talked about it with my staff. I said, what is bad about this? What is not good about this? But this is just such a crazy, hectic pace. It's a lot to adjust to. And yes, you do have to ask your scheduler to say, I want to go to the gym, so please put that on my schedule. It has to be on your schedule, and you cannot do anything if your scheduler does not know about it, including I'm going to go see my family for 2 hours and I'm having dinner with my family. It's a very hectic kind of lifestyle, but I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, that's good to know. And I think it's important for all of us to know, because we only see glimpses of what you all are doing, and you know, we see you on C-SPAN or what have you, and it's just a slice of what you're actually doing. And I think that brings me to kind of a more substantive question, which is, you know, we're in an era where I think everybody would agree that we have a very active executive branch in the second term of the Trump presidency. Before this, and certainly now, there have been concerns that Congress has been ceding control, influence, and power to the executive branch. And I should remind those in the audience, that Congress is actually named first in the Constitution. It's Article 1 talks about Congress. It's Article 2 that talks about the executive branch. So clearly the framers had an idea of the legislature being having primacy. And so I'm asking this really in a nonpartisan way, because I think this was true under President Biden, a Democrat, under President Trump, a Republican. Do you have the sense that Congress has ceded some power and influence to the executive branch? And if so, are there things that Congress could do to take that power back?
This is something that has bugged me for a long time. I mean, you know, current events have nothing to do with it. I think it's really easy to cede responsibility if you don't have the intestinal fortitude to be on the record for making hard decisions. And, you know, there's two big parts of that, you know, the power of the purse in Congress and the declare war. I mean, what's that even mean or look like? And being a veteran, I think about a lot is what does it mean to send somebody into harm's way when you have the executive, where a lot of that power seems to have been ceded to the executive branch and not where it was constitutionally intended to be. And we've kind of blurred those lines. And I think a lot of times it is that, you know, it's really easy to say, well, hey, you know, I'm going to let them make the hard decision. And I think that we've gone pretty far down that path. And I think we do need to start being very serious about clawing a lot of that back.
I would agree and chime in here. I think part of what we've seen is hyper-partisanship in Congress is preventing us from doing the work of the people. When we're not talking to each other, when we're passing bills on strictly partisan lines, and when there's partisan gridlock from being able to pass a budget. We're not supposed to be governing with CRs. They're Band-Aids. We're not supposed to be funding our government through CRs. We're supposed to be passing budget bills through appropriations. That's what we're supposed to be doing, but we're not doing that because of the gridlock and the partisanship in Congress. And because of that, we're resulting in us not doing our job, and the executive just on both sides of the aisle stepping in and governing through executive order, which is not the will of the people. We are the representatives who were designed by the founding fathers to be closest to the people, to be reflecting what the people of this nation want. And so I think, yes, we have ceded way too much of our power. We need to get it back. I need my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to help us get it back. We need to start working together and start speaking together, because I think, and I'm not going to get too partisan here, but in this administration, we are seeing an outrageous overreach of executive power.
Tell us, and just for the audience, tell us what a CR is. I know what it is, but maybe other folks don't.
So a CR is a continuing resolution. It's basically a mechanism by which Congress can keep the lights on in the government, because we have not passed all the budget appropriation bills that we're supposed to be doing to fund the government properly. Is it
accurate to say it's kind of kicking the can down the road? You're saying you're keeping things in place instead of making the actual decision?
100%.
Okay, great. How about you? What do you think about this topic?
Yeah, so I think at the brings to mind two things. I mean, one is that I believe, in our constitutional structure, it was intended and designed to have this tension of give and take between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And so I saw it all the time in state government as well. Now it is magnified by maybe 100 here at the federal level, but that same concept is still at play, right? Where is that line drawn? And in every area, it's different. I mean, when there are some things that come out from the executive branch, you go, well, you probably do actually have the authority to do that. Maybe because we seeded it, maybe because it is something within the purview of the executive branch. And then there are other times when you go, that is definitely not something you should be doing. That is within our jurisdiction. But then you have to put a second screen on it. And it's something that comes out of the discussion that we had here. You are so stretched thin as a legislator, you have to pick your battles. You really have to focus. And the way that we focus in Congress is through our committee assignments. And so you try to become an expert or knowledgeable in those topics in that area because, not just executive branch, but legislatively, if you try to do everything and respond to everything or have a policy or something that is going to push back on a change in the executive branch or any change that you see that needs to be done, you're never going to get anything done. And so you have to really pick your battles. You have to figure out where you're going to put your marker down. And, I've been doing that through, again, our committee assignments, I think is the best way to do that. And, you win some battles, you lose some battles, but that's kind of how you have to do it because in this era, especially, I think too many, and this is, now a little off topic, I feel like too many of our legislative colleagues want to be political commentators and they want to just comment on single thing that happens, but nobody's doing the legislative work. Nobody's actually writing a bill on this topic to make the change to get a different outcome next time. And so I feel like you have to focus, you have to do the work, chasing every shiny object.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all those great thoughts. It reflects something that scholars of Congress, political scientists have really always said about legislatures, which is that legislatures thrive on information and gathering information, disseminating it, figuring it out, distilling it. And that's certainly something that I'm hearing from all of you. And actually that leads us, so I've got a few questions and this is a nice one to kind of dovetail into what we just said. In an era of heightened partisanship, could you share an issue or action that required you to engage with others across the aisle, particularly a moment where there was common ground? I like the question, and any of you are welcome to take it.
So yesterday I was running around the floor of the House. And in fact, I sat down next to my colleague right here, Congressman Mackenzie, and I was trying to get him to join as a co-sponsor of my IVF bill. President Trump said he wants to be the king of IVF. So I said, come on, you got your president on board. Let's codify the right to IVF. I was running around to all my Republican colleagues because one of the things that happens on the floor of the House, you might see it if you watch C-SPAN, is the Republicans kind of sit on one side and the Democrats kind of sit on the other side. I think all of us during new member orientation really were trying to take the initiative to get to know our colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
That's great.
Because when you sit on your, we just do it. We just kind of sit on our side. And I had plenty of opportunity to get to know my Democratic colleagues, but if we're going to have a democracy where we actually get things done in a bipartisan fashion, you need to know some folks on the other side that I can say, hey, come here. Remember what we talked about? Let's do it. And so on my science-based, I deliberately chose committees that were more bipartisan or tend to be more bipartisan. I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I'm also on Transportation and Infrastructure. Everybody likes roads to be fixed. Everybody likes bridges. I always joke that my first hearing in committee, we had a number of witnesses testifying. The first one was the governor of Louisiana, who's probably as right as you could get. And he was talking about how he needed bridges and he needs a new bridge in Baton Rouge. And my daughter is actually teaching in Baton Rouge, in a suburb of Baton Rouge. And so I pulled him aside outside. I said, oh, Governor, my daughter's teaching in Donaldsonville, and I know all about the traffic and the bridge you need. And I'm a Democrat, but I'm here to tell you I'm going to I'm going to try to help you get money for that bridge. You need that bridge. And he said, oh, thank you so much. Come to the governor's mansion. And then meanwhile, in oversight, Nancy Mace and Jasmine Crockett were challenging each other to a fist fight. So I was like, I'm on a committee where I might be able to like actually get things done for my constituents and make sure that some of the infrastructure money that we saw that was a great success that some people on the other side fought against, but now on both sides of the aisle, they like that money and they want it coming back to their districts. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to actually get that done. So, so those are some of the things that we're working on.
The second part of the story that she didn't tell you, when she sat down to ask me about the IVF bill, and I said, well, I'm fully supportive of IVF. I have some legislation of my own on that topic. I said, but I don't know if you just saw the board. I just voted against my leadership on maternity rights and
Yes,
Congress.
right.
So I said, I'm not sure my co-sponsorship is going to do you much good. So,
He did say that to me. Felt sorry for him.
And Congressman, tell us more about that. I think it's a very interesting story that people might not be aware of. So tell us,
So look, I don't know if people saw the news yesterday or not, but there was a contentious vote in the House, and it was a rules package. And so there were about 5 different components to it, 2 standalone bills, 2 congressional review acts, which are basically allow for a simple majority to kick out regulatory actions from the last administration. And then there was also a component about proxy voting for members of Congress relating to maternity and paternity leave. And so it's something that I was a co-sponsor of that rules change. And there's another member of Congress who's leading the fight, and she had gotten the ability to change the rules via a discharge petition. So she went around and got the 218 signatures that are needed to force the hand of leadership to call something up, which is normally totally in their purview. They get to set the agenda and determine what's on the calendar, unless you use this discharge petition mechanism. So that was going to come up, and ultimately leadership bundled 5 different components together, and they would have effectively killed that rules change. But that's something that, as I talked about earlier, is something that I'm passionate about and I'm fighting for in other legislative areas. And so I felt the need to stick to my prior commitments. And I think it's not only, something that I had said that I would support, but also this was the opportunity to make that statement public and do it in a way that would help members of Congress, which I think is great because that body has changed so much since the time of our founding of government. We have more women legislators and also people who have young families than ever before. And if you want those people to be able to serve in government, you need to have rules and operations that actually match that reality. So that I was one of 9 of us Republicans that voted with the Democrats on that last night. I'm not sure where that's going to go, what the next step is going to be, but it was something that I did in a bipartisan fashion.
Sure.
And to answer your question then about bipartisan legislation, my time in the state legislature really informed what I focus on now at the federal level. So in state government, you can kind of, again, you don't have to focus as much. You're able to work on issues all across the spectrum. I think I was there for 12 years. Every piece of legislation I passed, I think, had pretty strong bipartisan support, but they were in all different areas. But the 2 areas that I found not only the most bipartisan appetite for, but then also had some kind of federal connection are those 2 things I talked about. So working families and the expansion of E-Verify. So in the working families category, I introduced 4 pieces of legislation at the start of the session. 1 would expand on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act to have a higher percentage match for businesses that offer paid maternity and paternity leave. So doubling that, the second one is a tax credit to offset the cost of childcare, which I already talked about. The third is an expansion of the child tax credit. And then the fourth is expanding the adoption tax credit, but also adding a matching component for IVF. And so those four things I put out right at the beginning of the session so that they're all tax code changes on topics that I care about for working families, but also the reason they're tax code changes is so that they could be considered in reconciliation, which is only tax and budget related.
Both of our bills.
Those are the things, you know, so the bipartisan support. I'll end on this and then I'll turn it over to Troy. On the E-Verify, our governor at the time in Pennsylvania was actually opposed to my legislation.
Right.
But we got bipartisan supermajorities in the House and Senate. Over half of all the Republicans, but over half of the Democrats even joined us from a labor perspective. And it actually, in Pennsylvania, there is, you know, there are three things that can happen to a bill. It can get signed into law, it can get vetoed, or the third option is it can lapse into law after 10 days. And that's what ended up happening to the Verify bill because we had the veto-proof supermajorities necessary. So working together in a bipartisan fashion, those Democrat members there actually went against their governor, and we were actually able to get that law into effect by working together collaboratively.
Great, thank you.
Just briefly, I mean, neither side has a monopoly on good ideas, and neither side has a monopoly on bad ideas. I actively seek co-sponsors on the other side of the aisle for a number of reasons. And I have a bill right now that Congresswoman Bynum, Democrat, is co-sponsoring that deals with access to capital for small businesses in rural communities. We both care about that. We're both doing that together. But really, one of the driving things is not just on refining ideas. I mean, talking to stakeholders, talking to other side about, you know, unintended consequences, how you can make something better, how you can distill, you know, these ideas into better policy is I think a worthy endeavor. But the other part is I didn't come here to do messaging. You know, I came here to actually laws passed, actually make changes, do positive things. And just the structure that we have right now, I don't want to spend my time on something that's never going to become law. And getting something that's going to become law, especially once it leaves the House and goes to the Senate, we need 60 votes there. You need to get folks on the other side of the aisle to agree with you. And if I start on the House side to get engagement there, I think there's more of an opportunity to actually get it through the Senate. And if that happens, I think there's a possibility of it becoming law because I'm not here to message. I actually want to get things done. And I think that is the best path for finding things that you can get done.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, and I'm going to turn to something a little bit, very topical and a little bit substantive. And it's a thoughtful question. What are everyone's thoughts on the tariffs that Trump laid out today, President Trump laid out today, and in the past as well? You know, tariffs are an interesting thing, and trade is an interesting thing, because I think this is a issue which both parties have been kind of moving around a fair amount over the last 10 or 20 years. And certainly tariffs move into that territory. Do you have thoughts about the wisdom or lack thereof of these tariffs, how you'd like them to proceed? I heard, for example, Majority Leader John Thune saying, I hope these are temporary and used only as, mostly as sort of negotiating tools as opposed to being permanent. Your thoughts, and again, I know this is an explosive issue, so I'm not asking you to debate it, but I think we'd all like to hear what you all think about this very important development.
So I'll chime in. I think this is one of the areas where we have ceded our power. Congress should be determining what our tariff and trade policies are, not the executive branch, but because we've seen a lack of leadership from Congress, that's why we're getting these executive orders. And with respect to the tariff policy, it's not surprising. I think, first of all, it's been completely chaotic. It's hard to even keep track of what the tariffs are. It's this country, it's whiskey, it's wine, it's China, it's this country, it's this much, no, now we're gonna take a break. It's completely chaotic, and we see that reflected in our markets crashing, and it's really bad for business. I've had so many different groups come into my office talking about housing. They don't even know what they can do with housing because they don't know how much things are going to cost. There's one set of costs because of the tariff stay. There's another set of costs. The business community likes predictability, and this chaotic, crazy tariff on and off, this one, that one, has been really bad for the business community, and I think it's really going to hurt the American people because we have a cost of living crisis in this country, and I think this is going to be very harmful to the American people.
Congressman?
Yeah, thanks. No, so look, I think tariffs are an important tool in our economic toolkit. And so I think it is wrong to ever totally discount them or say that we shouldn't use them in any situation. I think typically they are best used in a targeted fashion. There are instances where they can actually be very helpful to American business and American industry. We have seen China in many instances using their government and their tariff system and their subsidies that they offer certain industries to undercut American jobs and American industries with the intention, in the case of dumping products into our market, sometimes coming through Mexico and otherwise, with the pure intention of trying to eliminate companies and industries here in the US. And there are things that are very critical to our national security, steel, aluminum, and other things that we do want to make sure that they continue. And so putting tariffs in place so they are not getting undersold unfairly is something that I think is a very reasonable approach. Now, what you see when you do broad-based tariffs, though, in not a targeted fashion, there end up being some people that are helped and benefited by things like that, and there are other people that are going to be hurt. And so you really do need to figure out how you can have that targeted approach, not only economically, but for national security reasons. And when you talk about the broader economic use of tariffs for a negotiating tool to try to bring down somebody's reciprocal tariffs, there is merit to that. And often, in many instances, think about cars going into Europe. I know Europe is an ally of ours. Of course they are. We want to continue that relationship. But for so many years, their cars have come into our country with no tariffs. And then when we try to send a car over to Europe, there's a 10% tariff, there's a 19% VAT tax. There are all these other charges that make it impossible for American companies to have their products sold into that market. And so that's not right, that's not fair. And so at some point, you do have to stand up and you do have to say, you know what, the way to bring these down, hopefully, is by the threat or the imposition of tariffs on the other side. Now, ultimately, the end goal should be, in my opinion, to reduce those barriers on both sides so that there is more free trade going on, but it's also fair. And so, I think it's going to be yet to be seen what happens with these particular tariffs, but I actually do think that they are something that we should be using in our economic toolkit.
Yeah, I think tariffs, they're a tool. I mean, nobody wants to get in a trade war, but they are a tool. And I'm going to disagree with one thing that you said, that all business hates it, because I've got businesses that, are worried. I've got businesses that are happy. I've got both of them depending on what they're in. But I do think we need to level the playing field. I think we need to, have, fair and eventually, free trading agreements, which we don't have right now. And I do think that it's important to the long-term safety of the United States of America that we do have the ability to produce domestically. And I think what we're seeing I think what you said is chaotic, is we're seeing a lot of investments actually coming into the United States. We see big companies, making big, investments in the United States. Hyundai, Apple, all these companies deciding to do business in the United States. So I think that that's good. On the other part, there's, I am concerned, and, tariffs can be seen as inflationary, and a big part of my district is agricultural. And so I worry about, the cost of inputs. I worry about the cost of parts, machinery, that kind of stuff. That to some extent, if it's long-term, can be dealt with in tax policy to some extent, but that doesn't solve the problem with export. My grain growers, 60% of their product gets sent abroad, and they are concerned about that, as they should be. And so we try to make sure that the administration understands our concerns there as we navigate that. Where this ultimately ends, we'll see. I think it's a tool right now to get to an end, and I think we all agree that we want to have production in the United States, and we want to have fair trading agreements with our trading partners.
Just a point of clarification. I didn't say all businesses hate tariffs. Certainly some businesses might benefit from tariffs. But what the business community does not like is the complete uncertainty of what's going on right now.
I agree with that.
Good point. Well, we need to wrap up, unfortunately. It's not surprising that we had 3 NYU alumni who all had thoughtful, good-spirited things to say about government. Thanks so much for being with us. Congresswoman Ryan Mackenzie, Congressman Troy Downing, and Congresswoman Laura Gillen. We really appreciate it, and thank you from NYU for your continued support of what we do, and we look forward to having you back for more talks. We appreciate it. Thank you.
I get to go back and do my markup now.
Exactly.
Back to work.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. This was great.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh my gosh.